The summer heat clung to Lakeland's west side like a suffocating blanket, and 10-year-old Beverly Rose Potts could feel the sweat beading on her forehead as she walked toward Halloran Park. The showmobile had arrived that afternoon, its garish painted sides promising an evening of entertainment that would break the monotony of another sweltering August day in 1951. The girl's brown hair bounced with each step, her simple dress already sticking to her small frame as she made her way through the familiar neighborhood streets. She had begged her parents to let her attend the outdoor performance, and after much deliberation, they had reluctantly agreed she could go alone, provided she returned home immediately afterward. The park was already crowded when she arrived, families spread across blankets on the grass, children running between the adults, while vendors hawked cold drinks and popcorn. The showmobile sat like a colorful carnival wagon in the center of the field, its stage extending outward to accommodate the performers who would soon emerge. The child found a spot near the front, her eyes bright with anticipation as the first acts began to take the makeshift stage. Singers crooned popular tunes while dancers moved in synchronized routines, their costumes glittering under the harsh lights that had been strung around the performance area. As darkness began to creep across the sky, the young girl became increasingly aware that she should start thinking about heading home. Her parents had been clear about their expectations, and she knew better than to test their patience. The final act was a magic show, and she watched with rapt attention as the performer made objects disappear and reappear, his patter filling the warm evening air with promises of wonder and mystery. When the applause finally died down and the crowd began to disperse, the 10-year-old gathered herself up and began the familiar walk back toward her home on Lynette Avenue. The streets were quieter now, most of the other children having already been collected by their parents or traveling in groups for safety. The girl walked alone, her footsteps echoing off the pavement as she passed under the dim street lights that cast long shadows across her path. She had made this journey countless times before, but something felt different tonight. The air seemed thicker, more oppressive, and the usual sounds of the neighborhood dogs barking, radios playing, families talking on their front porches seemed muted and distant. A figure emerged from the darkness ahead, walking in her direction with a steady, purposeful gait. The child slowed her pace instinctively, her heart beginning to race as the stranger drew closer. In the weak light, she could make out the silhouette of a man, though his features remained obscured by shadow. He seemed to be looking directly at her, and something in his posture made her skin crawl with an inexplicable dread. The girl considered turning around and running back toward the park, but the crowds had already dispersed, and she knew she would find no safety there. The stranger was speaking now, his voice low and difficult to understand over the sound of her own heartbeat pounding in her ear. He seemed to be asking for directions, or perhaps offering to help her find her way home. The words were innocuous enough, but there was something in his tone that made every instinct scream for her to flee. The 10-year-old took a step backward, then another, her eyes never leaving the approaching figure, as she tried to formulate an escape plan. What happened next would remain a mystery for decades to come. Several witnesses would later report seeing the small girl walking alone along Lynette Avenue sometime between 9 and 9:30 that evening, but no one could agree on exactly when or where they had spotted her. Some claimed to have seen her talking to a man near the corner of West 117th Street, while others insisted she had been alone when they observed her. The accounts were frustratingly vague and contradictory, leaving investigators with more questions than answers. At home, Robert and Elizabeth Potts waited anxiously for their daughter's return. The couple had been married for 15 years, and had raised their children with a careful balance of freedom and protection. They knew the neighborhood was generally safe, and the child had proven herself to be responsible and trustworthy on previous occasions. But as the clock ticked past 10, then 10:30, their concern began to transform into genuine alarm. The showmobile performance should have ended hours ago, and even if she had lingered to talk with friends, she would never stay out this late without permission. The father decided to venture out and look for his missing daughter, walking the route she would have taken from Halloran Park back to their home. He called her name as he searched, checking with neighbors and asking if anyone had seen the girl. The responses were uniformly negative, though several people mentioned having noticed her earlier in the evening walking toward the park. No one, however, could recall seeing her on the return journey. By midnight, the parents had contacted the Cleveland Police Department, though the officers who responded seemed less than concerned about what they initially viewed as a simple case of a child staying out past curfew. They took down the basic information and assured the frantic parents that missing children almost always turned up safe and sound within a few hours. The girl had probably just lost track of time or was spending the night with a friend without permission. These things happened all the time, they explained with practiced patience. But as dawn broke over the city with no sign of the missing 10-year-old, the casual dismissal gave way to mounting urgency. Detective Chief James MacArthur was assigned to lead the investigation, and his first step was to organize a systematic search of the area surrounding Halloran Park and the route the child would have taken home. Dozens of volunteers joined the effort, combing through backyards, vacant lots, and abandoned buildings in an ever-widening circle around her last known location. The detective was a 20-year veteran of the force, a methodical man who had solved numerous missing persons cases through patience and attention to detail. But there was something about this particular disappearance that troubled him from the very beginning. The complete lack of witnesses, the absence of any clear timeline, and the girl's reputation for responsibility all suggested that something genuinely sinister had occurred. This was not a simple case of a child wandering off or hiding from her parents. The search expanded over the following days, with hundreds of police officers, firemen, and civilian volunteers scouring every inch of the west side. Bloodhounds were brought in to track the missing girl's scent, but they lost the trail within a few blocks of her home, as if she had simply vanished into thin air. The local newspapers picked up the story, and soon the entire city was talking about the mysterious disappearance of Beverly Potts. Theories began to circulate almost immediately, each more disturbing than the last. Some suggested that the child had been kidnapped by strangers passing through the city, perhaps snatched off the street and taken far away before anyone realized she was missing. Others whispered about local predators, men who might have been watching and waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike. The most chilling possibility was that someone the family knew and trusted had betrayed that trust in the most horrific way imaginable. The investigation quickly revealed just how many registered sex offenders lived within a few miles of the Potts family home. Detective MacArthur and his team began the painstaking process of locating and questioning each one, searching for alibis and inconsistencies that might point to the perpetrator. The work was methodical but frustrating, as most of the suspects had seemingly solid explanations for their whereabouts on the night in question. Those who didn't were subjected to more intensive scrutiny, but none emerged as a clear suspect. One particularly disturbing lead emerged when several witnesses came forward to report seeing a suspicious man in the area around Halloran Park on the evening of the disappearance. The descriptions were maddeningly vague. A white male, average height and build, possibly in his 30s or 40s, but there was something about his behavior that had caught their attention. He had been observed watching the children at the showmobile performance with what seemed like unusual interest, and more than one person recalled feeling uncomfortable about his presence. The mysterious figure had been seen again later that evening, walking along the same streets the missing girl would have used to return home. But despite extensive efforts to identify him, the man seemed to have vanished as completely as his alleged victim. Police sketches were circulated throughout the city, but they generated hundreds of false leads and no solid suspects. The investigation was beginning to feel like an exercise in chasing shadows. Meanwhile, the media attention intensified with each passing day. Newspapers across the country picked up the story, and radio broadcasts carried updates on the search efforts to millions of listeners. The case captured the public imagination in a way that few missing persons cases had before, perhaps because it seemed to represent every parent's worst nightmare. A responsible, well-loved child had simply walked out of their lives and into oblivion, leaving behind only questions and heartbreak. The parents appeared on television and radio programs, pleading for information about their missing daughter. The mother's anguished appeals were particularly heart-wrenching, her voice breaking as she described the 10-year-old's gentle nature and her love for animals and books. She spoke of the girl's dreams of becoming a teacher someday, of the drawings and poems that still covered her bedroom walls, of the empty chair at the dinner table that served as a constant reminder of their loss. As weeks turned to months, the active search efforts gradually scaled back, though the investigation remained officially open. Detective MacArthur continued to pursue leads and follow up on tips, but the trail had grown cold. The case files grew thicker with each passing month, filled with witness statements, police reports, and laboratory analyses that revealed nothing of substance about what had happened to the missing child. One of the most haunting aspects of the case was how completely the girl seemed to have vanished. In most missing persons investigations, there are traces, physical evidence, reliable witnesses, or at least a clear sequence of events leading up to the disappearance. But this case offered none of those things. The 10-year-old had simply stepped into the darkness between the park and her home, and never emerged on the other side. The psychological toll on the family was devastating. The parents aged visibly over the months following their daughter's disappearance, their faces etched with the permanent strain of not knowing. They maintained her bedroom exactly as she had left it, her clothes still hanging in the closet, and her school books stacked neatly on the desk. They held on to the hope that she might somehow return, but as time passed, that hope became increasingly difficult to sustain. The case attracted the attention of numerous psychics and self-proclaimed mystics, each claiming to have insights into the child's fate. They spoke of visions of abandoned buildings, distant cities, and tragic endings, but none of their predictions led to any useful information. The desperate parents listened to these claims with a mixture of hope and skepticism, willing to explore any possibility that might bring their daughter home. One particularly detailed vision came from a woman who claimed to have dreamed about the missing girl repeatedly since her disappearance. She described seeing the child in what appeared to be a basement or cellar, somewhere dark and cold where she was being held against her will. The psychic provided specific details about the location: a house with green shutters near a railroad track, an older man with graying hair and a distinctive scar on his left hand. Police investigated the lead thoroughly, but found no evidence to support the woman's claim. The first anniversary of the disappearance brought renewed media attention and a fresh wave of tips from the public. The police department received hundreds of phone calls in the days surrounding the anniversary date, but most proved to be from well-meaning citizens reporting suspicious activities that had no connection to the case. A few leads seemed promising initially, but quickly fell apart under closer scrutiny. Detective MacArthur, now bearing the weight of the unsolved case like a personal burden, continued to work the investigation with dogged determination. He had developed a theory that the perpetrator was likely someone familiar with the neighborhood, possibly even someone the family knew personally. The complete absence of physical evidence and witnesses suggested a level of planning and local knowledge that pointed to an inside job of sorts. The detective spent countless hours reviewing the case files, looking for patterns or connections that might have been missed during the initial investigation. He re-interviewed witnesses, followed up on old leads, and explored new avenues of inquiry as they presented themselves. But the case seemed to resist all efforts to solve it, as if the truth had been deliberately hidden beyond the reach of conventional investigative techniques. A breakthrough seemed to come in the second year of the investigation, when a construction crew working on a building demolition project discovered what appeared to be children's clothing buried beneath a basement floor, several miles from the Potts home. The items were carefully excavated and sent for forensic analysis, but the results were inconclusive. The clothing was too deteriorated to yield useful evidence, and there was no way to determine how long it had been buried or whether it had any connection to the missing girl. Similar false hopes emerged periodically over the following years. Remains would be discovered in remote locations, witnesses would come forward with new information, or suspects would be arrested in connection with other crimes that seemed to match the pattern of the Potts case. But each lead eventually proved to be another dead end, leaving the investigation no closer to resolution than it had been on the first day. The case began to take on an almost mythical quality in the Cleveland area, becoming part of local folklore and urban legend. Parents used it as a cautionary tale when teaching their children about stranger danger, while amateur detectives and true crime enthusiasts continued to speculate about what might have happened. The story was featured in magazines, books, and eventually television documentaries, each retelling adding new layers of speculation and theory to the basic facts of the case. One of the most persistent theories involved a traveling carnival that had been in the Cleveland area around the time of the disappearance. Several witnesses recalled seeing carnival workers in the neighborhood in the days before the child went missing, and some suggested that she might have been abducted by someone connected to the traveling show. This theory gained credence from similar cases in other cities where children had disappeared during carnival visits, but investigators were never able to establish a definitive connection. Another theory focused on the possibility that the girl had been killed accidentally, perhaps struck by a car, whose driver panicked and hid the body rather than report the incident. This scenario would explain the complete absence of witnesses and physical evidence, as well as the fact that no ransom demands or other communications had ever been received. But extensive searches of the area had failed to turn up any evidence of such an accident, and the theory remained purely speculative. The most disturbing theory, and the one that seemed to gain the most support from law enforcement officials, was that the 10-year-old had been abducted by a sexual predator who had been stalking her for some time. This would explain the apparent planning involved in the crime, as well as the perpetrator's ability to spirit her away without being detected. The lack of a body or other physical evidence suggested that the killer had considerable experience and had taken great care to cover his tracks. As the years passed, the active investigation gradually wound down, though the case remained officially open. Detective MacArthur retired without ever solving what he considered to be the most frustrating case of his career, passing the files on to a younger generation of investigators who brought fresh eyes to the old evidence. But despite their efforts, the case continued to resist solution, becoming one of Cleveland's most famous unsolved mysteries. The parents never gave up hope entirely, though they eventually had to accept the likelihood that they would never see their daughter again. They became advocates for missing children, working with other families who had experienced similar tragedies and supporting legislation designed to improve the response to child abduction cases. Their grief became a driving force for positive change, though it could never fully compensate for the loss they had suffered. The missing girl's bedroom remained unchanged for decades, a shrine to a life cut short and dreams unfulfilled. Visitors to the house were often struck by the eerie feeling that she might return at any moment, as if time had stopped on that August evening. Her clothes still hung in the closet, her books remained open to pages she would never finish reading, and her toys sat exactly where she had left them, waiting for small hands that would never return. In the final analysis, the disappearance of Beverly Rose Potts remains one of the most chilling unsolved cases in American criminal history. The complete absence of witnesses, physical evidence, or credible suspects has left investigators and amateur detectives alike scratching their heads for more than 7 decades. The case serves as a stark reminder of how easily a child can vanish without a trace, leaving behind only questions, theories, and the enduring anguish of those who loved her. The truth about what happened on that hot August night may never be known. Perhaps the perpetrator took his secret to the grave, or perhaps the evidence lies buried somewhere, waiting to be discovered by future generations, with better technology and fresh perspective. Until that day comes, the mystery of the missing 10-year-old will continue to haunt Cleveland and serve as a testament to the fragility of innocence in a world where evil can strike without warning, leaving behind only shadows and unanswered prayers.